You're not supposed to take the last train. People don't tell you that out loud, of course. They'll smile, wave, and wish you a good night. But deep down, if they've ever taken it, they know. Something about the final train run, the one that rattles down the tracks when the rest of the city has shut its eyes, carries a weight. You can feel it pressing on you the moment you step aboard, and I should have listened to that unspoken rule that it was 2:57 a.m. when I reached the platform. The air was cold enough to burn my lungs, but the stillness of the station was worse. No breeze, no movement, just the faint buzzing of the overhead lights, that sharp, electric hum that sounds almost like a whisper if you stand still long enough. The train screeched into view, its headlights slicing through the tunnel like to pale, unfocused eyes. I remember thinking, I'm the only one here. That wasn't strange for the hour, but the silence made it feel like I was stepping into a world that no longer belonged to the living. The doors opened with a hiss. When I stepped inside, my boots clicked against the linoleum floor. The sound bounced back to me in hollow echoes. There wasn't a single other passenger. Not one. Good. I liked my solitude. Or, at least, I thought I did. I took a seat midway down the car, right next to the window. Outside, the tunnel walls slipped by, in shades of dirty grey. I could already feel my body relaxing, the familiar sway of the train rocking me toward drowsiness. That's when I glanced up at the digital display. 3:17 A.M. Strange. I could have sworn it had just turned 3 before I boarded. I brushed it off, assuming the clock was slow. I leaned my head back, closed my eyes, and let the sound of the tracks lull me. Only, the sound of the tracks didn't change. Usually, there's a rhythm, the kind that speeds up or slows down as the train approaches a station. This time, it was steady, too steady, like someone was looping the same few seconds of audio over and over. When I opened my eyes again, the digital display still read 3:17 a.m. I felt the first flicker of unease, but I told myself not to be paranoid. It was late, I was tired, and I'd had more than a few drinks earlier. Time can play tricks in that state, but I kept watching that clock. 5 minutes later, or maybe 10, I wasn't sure it hadn't changed. My phone, when I pulled it out, refused to light up, completely dead, even though I'd charged it before leaving. That's when I noticed something else. The train wasn't stopping. We should have reached the next station by now. But the tunnel outside went on, an endless smear of concrete and graffiti. No lights, no signs, no shift in momentum, just forward motion into nowhere. I tried to stand, but the air felt heavier somehow, like moving through water. Every step toward the door took effort. My own breathing sounded too loud in my ears. I reached the nearest exit door and pressed the button. Nothing happened. I pressed again. Still nothing. When I turned back toward my seat, I froze. I wasn't alone anymore. 2 rows down sat a man, or, at least, I think it was a man. His head was tilted toward the window, but the reflection on the glass didn't match the angle of his face. The reflection was looking at me. A chill rippled up my spine. I blinked, and when my eyes opened again, the seat was empty. I told myself I must have imagined it. Maybe it was just a shadow, maybe a trick of the flickering light overhead. But the longer I sat there, the more it felt like the air itself was watching me. 3:17 a.m. still. The train rattled on. Asterisk. My mind kept circling the same thought. Maybe there's just a delay, but I knew that wasn't right. This wasn't my first late-night ride, and delays didn't feel like this. Delays still had an end. This felt endless. The hum of the lights overhead began to blend with the sound of the tracks, creating a low, vibrating drone that pressed against the inside of my skull. I tried to focus on something else. The safety map above the door, the emergency exit instructions, the peeling blue paint along the window frame, but none of it helped. That was when the overhead lights flickered. Not the normal kind of flicker you see on old subway cars. This was sharp, like the entire train was being pulled through to realities that couldn't quite agree on which one was real. For just a heartbeat, the windows no longer showed tunnel walls. They showed darkness, a deep, unlit expanse, as if we were suspended in an infinite black void. I couldn't see the tracks, couldn't see the floor below us, only the faint glimmer of something moving far, far in the distance. And then the walls were back, as if nothing had happened. I rubbed my eyes hard, telling myself I was imagining things. Sleep deprivation does that. But then I noticed the man again. He was sitting across the aisle now, 2 seats ahead, his head bowed forward just enough that I couldn't see his eyes. His hands rested neatly on his knees, unmoving, pale in the harsh fluorescent light. I cleared my throat, more to remind myself I still existed than to get his attention. "Hey," I said, my voice hoarse. No reaction. I leaned forward a little, and that's when I saw it. His chest wasn't moving, not even the faintest rise and fall of breath. The air grew colder. I felt it slide over my skin, seeping into the fabric of my coat. My fingers twitched, a small, involuntary shiver running through them. And then, without lifting his head, he spoke. "You missed your stop." The voice was wrong. It didn't match the shape of the body, too low, too resonant, like it was coming from behind me and inside my head at the same time. I shot to my feet, every instinct screaming at me to move, but when I glanced toward the door, the button panel was gone. The entire doorway was sealed over with metal, as if it had never been a way out in the first place. The man, or whatever it was, slowly raised his head. There were no eyes, just smooth, unbroken skin where they should have been. I stumbled backward, my shoulder slamming against the window. This isn't real. This isn't real. The lights flickered again, and for a split second, I saw dozens of figures lining the seats of the car, all of them facing forward, all of them still, all of them with those same eyeless faces. When the flicker passed, I was alone again. 3:17 a.m. still. The hum of the train deepened, almost like it was aware of my fear and savoring it. That's when I realized something that made my stomach twist. The tunnel outside wasn't repeating graffiti patterns anymore. The concrete had changed color, darker, almost wet looking, and the walls, they pulsed like they were breathing. I couldn't look away from those walls. Every few seconds, I thought I could see veins, thin, dark lines that stretched and contracted in time with that slow, unnatural breathing. But my mind kept looking for some rational explanation. A projection, a trick of the lights, my own exhaustion playing games with my perception. But the deeper I stared, the more I realized it wasn't just movement. There was texture, damp, uneven ridges, small, circular pores that opened and closed like the surface of skin. The train rocked slightly, and I felt the floor beneath me shift, as though it wasn't entirely solid anymore. My eyes darted back to the man. He hadn't moved, still seated, hands perfectly still, head slightly tilted now, as if listening for something I couldn't hear. The air was thicker, heavier. My breathing felt louder than it should have been, echoing faintly in my own ears. And then the smell hit me. It wasn't the sharp, metallic temps of the subway. This was sweet. Sickly sweet, like fruit left too long in the sun, but with something darker underneath. Something that made my stomach knot. Where does this train go? I asked before I could stop myself. The man's head twitched. Just a tiny movement, sharp and unnatural. His mouth didn't open, but his voice, that voice, filled the car again. It doesn't stop. There was no rise in tone, no inflection, just a flat certainty that landed heavy in my chest. I took a step toward the sealed door anyway, hoping maybe there was a way to pry it open. My hand pressed against the cold metal, but it wasn't just cold, it was damp. My fingers came away slick, and when I held them up to the light, the substance clung to my skin, translucent and faintly red at the edges. I stumbled back, my heel caught on the edge of a seat, and I nearly went down. The lights flickered again. For a moment, the man was gone. The seats were empty, all except for one figure standing at the far end of the car. It was turned away from me, tall and thin, its arms hanging too long at its sides, fingers brushing against the floor. The lights buzzed harder, flickering faster now, and each time they came back on, the figure was closer. 8 seats away, 4 seats, 2, and then gone. The flicker stopped, and the man was back in his seat, exactly where he had been, but this time his head was facing me directly, and without eyes, it was impossible to tell if he was looking at me, or through me. The sound of the train changed again. The wheels no longer clattered. Instead, there was a deep, rhythmic thud, as though we were rolling over something alive. I pressed my palm against the window, desperate for some landmark, something familiar, but the tunnel was gone. Outside was only that black void again, and in it, shapes moved. They didn't have defined edges, just distortions in the darkness, like shadows in water. Some were small, darting quickly. Others loomed larger than the train itself, drifting with unbearable slowness. The man spoke again. "You shouldn't have stayed on." And for the first time since I boarded, I realized my reflection wasn't in the glass anymore. The moment I realized my reflection was gone, my mind started clawing for any explanation that didn't end in madness. Maybe the lighting, maybe the angle, but no. I shifted, leaned closer to the glass, even waved my hand. Nothing. It was as if the window no longer saw me. That creeping cold in my chest spread outward, curling around my ribs. My breaths grew shorter, and the air in the car seemed to hum in rhythm with my heartbeat. I turned to the man, forcing my voice to stay steady. "What do you mean? I shouldn't have stayed on." This time, he didn't answer right away. He tilted his head the other way, almost bird-like, then let it rest on his shoulder in a way that seemed unnatural, like bones bending in places they shouldn't. Finally, he said, "The doors were opened for a reason." A shiver ran down my spine. I thought about the moment earlier, the station, the way everyone else had stepped off without a word, their eyes fixed on the ground. They hadn't just been leaving, they had been escaping. The hum of the train deepened, the light inside dimmed again, but this time it didn't flicker back to full brightness. The edges of the car blurred, as though the world beyond my immediate reach had been swallowed in a soft crawling darkness. Then came a sound that didn't belong on any train I'd ever known, the slow drag of something heavy across metal. It was coming from the roof. I froze, my gaze shooting upward. The sound moved, dragging, pausing, dragging again until it was directly above me. The roof creaked, as though under the weight of something massive, and a faint indentation formed, pressing inward. "Don't look up," the man whispered. It was the first time his voice had carried anything other than that flat, mechanical tone. This was different, urgent, almost pleading, which of course, made me want to look even more. The dragging stopped. Silence, then the faintest tapping sound, like long fingernails tracing the metal, slowly circling. I took an unsteady step toward the opposite side of the car, my eyes darting from the ceiling to the sealed doors. My pulse was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The man spoke again, quieter this time. It knows you're here now. Before I could ask what he meant, the lights went out completely. For a moment, the only sound was my own breathing. Then a whisper, not the man's voice. It came from above, from the thing, and it said my name. I staggered backward, my knees nearly buckling. My name echoed in the dark, stretched and warped, as though it had been pulled through 100 mouths. Before reaching my ears, the lights snapped back on. The car was empty. The man was gone. I was alone, or so I thought. From the far end of the car, a shadow began to take shape, not cast on the wall, but hanging in the air, twisting slowly, stretching long, impossibly long, until it touched the floor. The hum of the train grew louder, the walls shuddering with each vibration. I could feel something beneath the floor, a pulse, steady and deep, sinking with my own heartbeat until I couldn't tell which was mine. And then, the shadow stepped forward. The moment I realized my reflection was gone, my mind started clawing for any explanation that didn't end in madness. Maybe the lighting, maybe the angle, but no. I shifted, leaned closer to the glass, even waved my hand. Nothing. It was as if the window no longer saw me. That creeping cold in my chest spread outward, curling around my ribs. My breaths grew shorter, and the air in the car seemed to hum in rhythm with my heartbeat. I turned to the man, forcing my voice to stay steady. What do you mean? I shouldn't have stayed on. This time, he didn't answer right away. He tilted his head the other way, almost bird-like, then let it rest on his shoulder in a way that seemed unnatural, like bones bending in places they shouldn't. Finally, he said, the doors were open for a reason. A shiver ran down my spine. I thought about the moment earlier, the station, the way everyone else had stepped off without a word, their eyes fixed on the ground. They hadn't just been leaving, they had been escaping. The hum of the train deepened, the light inside dimmed again, but this time it didn't flicker back to full brightness. The edges of the car blurred, as though the world beyond my immediate reach had been swallowed in a soft crawling darkness. Then came a sound that didn't belong on any train I'd ever known, the slow drag of something heavy across metal. It was coming from the roof. I froze, my gaze shooting upward. The sound moved, dragging, pausing, dragging again until it was directly above me. The roof creaked, as though under the weight of something massive, and a faint indentation formed, pressing inward. Don't look up, the man whispered. It was the first time his voice had carried anything other than that flat, mechanical tone. This was different, urgent, almost pleading, which of course, made me want to look even more. The dragging stopped. Silence, then the faintest tapping sound, like long fingernails tracing the metal, slowly circling. I took an unsteady step toward the opposite side of the car, my eyes darting from the ceiling to the sealed doors. My pulse was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The man spoke again, quieter this time. It knows you're here now. Before I could ask what he meant, the lights went out completely. For a moment, the only sound was my own breathing. Then a whisper, not the man's voice. It came from above, from the thing, and it said my name. I staggered backward, my knees nearly buckling. My name echoed in the dark, stretched and warped, as though it had been pulled through 100 mouths. Before reaching my ears, the lights snapped back on. The car was empty. The man was gone. I was alone, or so I thought. From the far end of the car, a shadow began to take shape, not cast on the wall, but hanging in the air, twisting slowly, stretching long, impossibly long, until it touched the floor. The hum of the train grew louder, the walls shuddering with each vibration. I could feel something beneath the floor, a pulse, steady and deep, sinking with my own heartbeat until I couldn't tell which was mine. And then, the shadow stepped forward. The shadow was wrong in every possible way. It didn't move like something bound by flesh and bone. It glided, stretching and contracting as if the space around it bent to its will. My instincts screamed for me to look away, but my eyes refused to obey. It had no face, yet I felt its gaze bore into me, not just seeing me, searching me, peeling away everything that made me human. Piece by piece, I stumbled backward, my hands finding the cold rail by the seats. What? I whispered, my voice barely making it past my lips. It didn't answer. Instead, the windows on both sides of the train began to change. The city lights outside blurred, melting into streaks of pale grey, until the world beyond was nothing but an endless tunnel. No tracks, no stations, just the black throat of infinity. The train's hum deepened into a low groan, metal grinding against metal, yet we didn't slow. We couldn't slow. Then, the shadow moved closer. As it approached, I noticed something, small ripples in the air around it, like heat haze, distorting the space, and in those ripples, Flashes. They weren't reflections. They were memories. My memories. I saw myself as a child, clutching my mother's hand at a station. I saw the night I'd stayed too long at the office and missed the last train, or so I thought. I saw the moment earlier tonight when I'd stepped on board, thinking I was just escaping the rain. The shadow was feeding on them. "Stop," I hissed, my voice trembling but louder now. "Get out of my head." Its form quivered and split, not into two, but into many. Wisps of darkness peeled away, each carrying fragments of images that didn't belong to me. A war, a funeral, a child screaming in a burning building. This thing had seen countless lives, and taken them. The floor beneath me trembled again, but it wasn't the train this time. It was something deeper, a vibration that rose from below, as if the very rails had veins, and something massive was pushing blood through them. My knees buckled. I grabbed the seat for balance. That's when I saw it. Beneath the flicker of the dim lights, there was a seam in the floor. Not a design. A hatch. The shadow noticed my gaze and froze. Then, with a sudden, jerking lurch, the train tilted slightly, and the hatch opened. The stench hit first. Wet earth, rust, and something far worse, like old blood left to rot. My stomach turned. From the opening, I saw not machinery, but muscle fibers, red and wet, stretching like tendons along the walls of a living tunnel, and in the distance, something enormous pulsed a heart. That's when I understood. The train wasn't riding on tracks. It was the track. Or maybe it was alive. The shadow slid closer to me, and for the first time, I heard a sound coming from it, a low, rattling breath. Not like an inhale or exhale, but like a whisper being scraped out of stone. "You don't belong here," it said. The voice fractured, as if a dozen mouths were speaking at once. "I didn't choose to be here." I snapped back. My words sounded braver than I felt. The shadow leaned forward, stretching until its featureless head was inches from mine. "Everyone who's here chose." Before I could respond, the hatch beneath my feet yawned wider. I felt the heat rising from it, the thump of that massive heart syncing perfectly with the hum of the train. The walls groaned again, and far ahead, through the glass at the front of the car, I saw movement. Not a station, something bigger, a shape that filled the entire tunnel, blocking the way forward, and it was moving toward us. The thing ahead was not slowing down. At first I thought it might be another train, but there were no lights, no windows, no metallic gleam. It was flesh. The pale, wrinkled surface bulged as if something massive beneath it shifted. Veins, thick as tree roots, pulsed along its sides. And then, it opened. Not like a door, like a mouth. Rows of teeth, jagged and wet, emerged from the folds. They weren't human teeth. Too long, too uneven. They looked like shards of bone forced into soft tissue. The mouth stretched wider, the gums quivering. The shadow didn't move. It didn't even acknowledge the horror barreling toward us. Double quotes, move. I hissed, stepping back, but there was nowhere to go. The hatch in the floor was still gaping open, the stink of meat and decay rising from it. The train lurched forward, faster, as if eager to be swallowed whole. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, thudding in sync with that monstrous pulse beneath us. I stumbled toward the back of the car. Every instinct screamed to get away from the front, but when I reached the connecting door, it was locked. I rattled it hard. Nothing. The glass in the door warped under my touch, like it wasn't glass at all but a thin membrane. The shadow slid to my left, blocking the aisle. "You can't run," it said. The voice was different now, slower, heavier, as if each word costed effort. "It's been waiting for you." My skin went cold. "For me?" I asked, my voice shaking. It didn't answer. Instead, the lights flickered once, twice, and then stayed out. Darkness swallowed the car. I heard it then, the sound of something wet, dragging along the walls outside the train. A scraping, a suction, like giant tongues licking the metal. My stomach twisted. When the lights blinked back, the windows were gone. Not covered, gone. There was no outside anymore. Only flesh, pressed right against the frame, pulsing slowly like the sides of a lung. The air grew thicker, warmer. My breaths came shallow, and every inhale carried the coppery temps of blood. The shadow moved closer again, but I wasn't looking at it anymore. My eyes were fixed on the front, where that mouth was no longer just ahead, it was here. The front wall of the car split open. Not the door, the wall itself. Flesh tore, strings of tissue snapping weightly, and that mouth forced its way inside. Stumbled back, tripping over a seat, landing hard on the floor. My hands sank slightly. The carpet was gone. I was kneeling on something slick, something that twitched under my palms, and then I felt the floor move, not just shaking, breathing. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The shadow was right in front of me now. I tried to push past it, but its form was cold and thick, like trying to move through fog that fought back. The hatch yawned wider still, the smell hitting me like a blow. I looked down. Beneath the opening, the tunnel wasn't tunnel at all. It was a throat. The walls glistened with mucus, muscles contracting rhythmically. A dark liquid dripped upward against gravity, toward the train, as though we were the ones being pulled into it. The shadow leaned close, its voice barely audible now. "Once you're inside, You can't ever leave. The front of the car was gone now, consumed entirely by that mouth. The teeth scraped along the sides, sparks bursting as they tore into metal. The train shook violently, yet kept moving forward, straight into the darkness beyond the teeth. And then something changed. I felt it before I saw it. The pulse beneath my feet stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The air grew still. The shadow tilted its head, as if listening. Then, for the first time, I heard fear in its voice. It's not supposed to stop. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew one thing. If the thing ahead had stopped breathing, it wasn't because it was dead, it was because it was waiting. The floor dropped out from under me. Not all at once, it sank like a mattress giving way beneath my feet, and then I was sliding toward the open hatch. My hand scrambled for something solid. Anything, but the seats weren't metal anymore. They were soft, warm, alive. My fingers dug into the spongy surface, and it pulsed in response, like it could feel me clinging to it. I wanted to let go, but if I did, I'd fall straight into that glistening throat yawning below. The shadow didn't move to help me. It just stood there, its featureless face tilted down, watching. This is how it begins, it said softly. Train gave a violent jolt, as if struck from behind. My grip slipped, my legs kicked against the air, and then I was falling. The walls swallowed me instantly. It wasn't like falling into water. There was no splash, no impact, just an overwhelming squeeze. Flesh closed around my body, pressing in from every direction. The air was humid, thick, and smelled of copper and something sweet, rotten. I couldn't see. My arms were pinned to my sides, my face pressed into the slick wall of muscle that convulsed around me. The sound was deafening, not screams, not speech, but wet, grinding noises and a slow, steady heartbeat. I realized, with horror, that the heartbeat was mine. Something moved beneath the surface, brushing against my back. Not one thing, many. Fingers, long and thin, tracing the outline of my spine through the flesh. They didn't grab me, they were feeling me, as if memorizing my shape. I thrashed, trying to fight the crushing pressure, but each movement only made the walls tighten. My chest burned, there wasn't enough air. My lips parted to gasp, and warm fluid flooded my mouth. It wasn't water, it was thick, metallic, and pulsing, as though it were alive too. I spat it out, gagging, but more seeped in. My body shook violently. I could feel something pushing into my ears, my nose. The thing wanted inside. Then the wall shifted. The muscle around me rippled, dragging me downward. I couldn't tell if I was moving vertically or horizontally. Every direction felt wrong. The squeezing grew rhythmic, pushing me deeper. I opened my mouth to scream, but my voice didn't travel. The sound was swallowed instantly, absorbed into the wet walls, and then light. A slit opened ahead, pale and narrow. It wasn't sunlight, too cold, too sterile. As I was forced through, I realized it wasn't an exit. It was another mouth that spilled out into a chamber. It wasn't big, but it wasn't a room. The walls were flesh, threaded with veins that pulsed faintly. They were wet, and the floor, if you could call it that, sloped upward on all sides, like the inside of a hollow organ. And I wasn't alone. Shapes slumped against the walls. Human shapes. I crawled toward the nearest one, my hand slipping in the sticky fluid coating the floor. When I reached it, I froze. It was a man, or what was left of him. His skin was paper-thin, stretched tight over bone, but his chest still rose and fell faintly. His eyes were wide open, glassy, staring at something far away. His lips moved. No sound came out. I leaned closer, my ear nearly brushing his mouth. Still moving, he whispered, so faint I wasn't sure I'd really heard it. Before I could ask him anything, something shifted behind me. The shadow was here. It stood in the far corner, if you could call it a corner, perfectly still. Its outline was clearer now, more human-shaped, but its face remained blank. You thought you were inside the train, it said, but the train's been inside this all along. The chamber shuddered violently, and the man beside me twitched, his mouth opening in a silent scream. The walls tightened, and the floor began to rise, tilting toward another dark opening above us. I realized what was happening. We weren't in a chamber, we were in a stomach, and we were about to be sent somewhere. Far worse, I was being pushed upward. The walls heaved in a slow, deliberate rhythm, like the body knew exactly where it wanted me to go. The others in the chamber began sliding too, some moaning faintly, others completely limp. The shadow followed without touching the ground, gliding between the writhing bodies. Its voice was quiet, but in here, it didn't need to be loud. Up is never where you think it leads, it said. The opening above widened as we approached. Strings of thick, glistening fluid dangled from its rim, swaying gently. As soon as my head breached the threshold, a wave of cold air hit me. It was not a relief. The space beyond was massive, but it wasn't a room. It was a passage, twisting away into the distance, lined with ribs that curved overhead like the vaulted ceiling of a cathedral. The flesh between them quivered with each beat of the pulse, and far down the passage, something moved. It wasn't walking, it was dragging itself forward with too many limbs, its skin raw and stretched tight. Every time its head lifted, I saw an open mouth where its face should have been a mouth lined not with teeth, but with tiny, wriggling shapes. I froze. My instincts screamed to turn back, but the wall behind me had already sealed shut. Others were being funneled forward, their limbs jerking weakly as if they had no control. I tried to hold my ground, but the floor beneath me rippled, lifting in waves that carried me forward whether I wanted it or not. As I drew closer, I realized the wriggling in its mouth wasn't random movement. They were tongues, dozens of thin, searching tongues, twitching in the air like the legs of an insect. One of the others reached it first. The creature's tongues wrapped around the man's face, exploring every contour, sliding into his nostrils. His mouth, his ears, his body spasmed violently, then went still. The tongues released him, and his head slumped forward, but he didn't fall. He stood there, eyes vacant, waiting for something. The creature turned toward me. I backed away, but the ribbed walls pulsed inward, closing the space between us. The air smelled like something sweet burning, making my head swim. When the tongues touched my cheek, my entire body locked. It wasn't pain. It was memory. Flashes burned behind my eyes. A subway station at night. The sound of an approaching train. The feeling of someone standing too close behind me. My own voice, whispering words I didn't remember saying. And then a sudden pull, like something yanking me off the platform, but not down. Up. The tongues slid across my eyes, my lips, the back of my neck. My mind swirled, and for a moment I couldn't remember why I was here, or even what here was. Then I heard the shadow's voice again. Don't let it take everything. The words jolted through me, and I shoved forward, breaking the creature's hold. I stumbled into the ribbed corridor, my hands sliding over the slick walls. Behind me, the thing screeched, not a sound of anger, but of hunger denied. I ran, the corridor twisted in impossible ways, sometimes spiraling, sometimes folding in on itself. Every so often, I caught glimpses of other passages through thin, translucent membranes, where shadowy figures moved in parallel. Some of them looked human, some didn't. At one turn, I saw a section of the wall part slightly, revealing a glimpse of outside. It wasn't sky or land. It was endless, featureless, black, with faint points of light that seemed to pulse in sync with the heartbeat around me. The sight made me dizzy. I pulled away, pressing forward until I reached a narrow gap between two massive bone-like structures. Beyond it lay a space unlike anything I'd seen so far. It was dry. The walls were cracked and pale, the floor covered in a thin layer of dust. In the center stood an old wooden bench, the kind you'd find on a train platform, and above it, a flickering sign that read, "Next stop uneven." There was no sound, no movement. The heartbeat was gone. I sat on the bench, breathing hard. For the first time since I'd fallen into this thing, I couldn't feel it moving around me. I almost convinced myself I'd found some kind of safe place. Then I noticed the dust shifting. Tiny depressions formed in the powder, like invisible feet pacing back and forth in front of me. They moved closer and closer, until they stopped right at my knees. The shadow's voice came from the empty air in front of me. "You're closer to the conductor than you realize." Before I could ask what it meant, the dust exploded upward, blinding me, and when it cleared, I was no longer in the dry room. I was standing in the aisle of the train again, but the passengers were gone. The seats were empty, the windows black, and down at the far end of the carriage, a door was opening. Slowly, as if whoever or whatever was on the other side already knew I was coming. The door at the far end slid open with a hiss that didn't sound mechanical. It sounded wet, like something parting flesh. For a long moment, nothing emerged. The aisle between me and the open door felt longer than it should have been, stretching, slightly, the way a nightmare plays tricks on distance. Then I saw him, the conductor. At first glance, he could have passed for human tall, dressed in a black uniform with a long coat that brushed the floor. A cap sat low on his head, casting his eyes in shadow, but the details didn't hold together. The fabric of his coat seemed to shift like smoke, curling into itself and reforming. The brim of his cap bent unnaturally, stretching wider for an instant before snapping back. And when he moved, his joints didn't bend in quite the right places. I wanted to speak, but my throat felt tight, as if someone had tied a knot inside it. He began walking toward me. With every step, the train seemed to change. The seats bulged outward as if something beneath the upholstery was pushing to get free. The overhead lights flickered with a pulse that matched the beat I'd felt deep inside the walls. When he was only a few feet away, I saw his face. It wasn't hidden in shadow. It was empty. No eyes, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin stretched to tight, like parchment over bone. But I could feel his gaze, as if it was inside my head, looking directly at the memories I didn't want anyone to see. "Ticket," he said. The word didn't come from his face. It came from behind me, from the air above, from under the floor. I spun, but there was nothing there. When I turned back, his hand was extended. I didn't have a ticket. I'd never had one. but somehow, my hand went to my pocket and pulled something out. A small, folded slip of paper that was warm to the touch. I didn't remember putting it there. He took it without looking, held it between his fingers for a second, and then crushed it in his fist. When he opened his hand again, the ticket was gone, replaced by something black and writhing. A tiny shape that twitched like a trapped insect. He pressed it into my chest. The moment it touched me, my vision blurred. I saw the train from far above, suspended in nothingness, its carriages stretching longer than the horizon. I saw shapes moving along the outside, clinging to it like barnacles. Some were human, some had once been human, and I heard voices. Dozens of them, hundreds, all speaking at once, whispering fragments of sentences I couldn't quite piece together. Missed my stop. She said. Don't look out the windows. It's been years. The doors only open in. I staggered back. The conductor hadn't moved, but I could feel something tethering me to him now. Something that pulsed faintly in my chest where he'd pressed the writhing thing. Your journey, he said, is almost over. But his tone made it sound less like a promise and more like a sentence. The lights went out. When they came back on, the conductor was gone. So were the doors. The carriage around me had changed completely. The seats were now rows of hard wooden benches, the floorboards damp and warped. The windows weren't black anymore. They showed something outside. Not a city, not a landscape. It was a blur of pale, distorted faces pressed against the glass, sliding by as if the train was moving through a crowd that never ended. Some of them smiled when they saw me. Others screamed silently, their mouths stretched impossibly wide. And then, without warning, one of them was inside. It didn't step through a door. It simply leaned forward, and the glass bent outward like a sheet of soft wax, letting it through. It was one of the passengers I'd seen earlier, but changed, skin loose and hanging, eyes rolling as if searching for something inside its own skull. It sat down beside me. You can still get off, it whispered, its lips barely moving. But not at any stop, you know. Before I could ask what that meant, the train lurched violently, throwing me forward. The lights flickered again, and now the benches were full. The carriage was packed shoulder to shoulder with passengers, all sitting perfectly still, all staring at me. Somewhere far ahead, a bell began to ring. Not the cheerful chime of arrival, but a deep resonant toll that felt like it was marking the end of something. I realized, with a sudden chill, that I wasn't just a passenger anymore. I was part of the crew, and the conductor was calling me forward. I didn't stand up right away. The tolling bell echoed through the carriage like it was inside my skull, vibrating against my teeth. The passengers didn't react to it, not even a blink. They just kept staring at me with that same glassy stillness, as though they were waiting for me to make the only move I could make. The figure that had slipped through the window leaned closer, its breath cold and damp on my ear. He doesn't like to wait, it whispered. I turned to look at it, but its face was gone, not vanished, but replaced. In the place of features there was now an old, cracked porcelain mask, hairline fractures running through it like veins. Behind those cracks, something shifted, watching me. The bell rang again. This time, it was closer. My body rose before my mind agreed to it. The aisle between the benches was narrow, but every passenger tilted their head just enough to give me a clear path forward, not because they wanted to help, but because they wanted to see. The air changed as I moved. At the start of the carriage, it was still the damp, sour smell of wet wood and old fabric. But as I approached the front, it grew colder, sharper, until it stung my nostrils like metal left in the snow. My breath fogged in front of me. The last passenger before the door was a child or something that wore the shape of one. Its legs dangled from the bench, swinging idly. It clutched a worn teddy bear so tightly the stuffing bulged from its seams. When I passed, it smiled a smile too wide, revealing teeth that were far too sharp for its age. I reached the front door and hesitated. It wasn't like the sliding doors between normal train cars. This one was made of dark, heavy wood, reinforced with thick black iron bands. The handle was a simple curved bar, but when I touched it, my fingers went numb. Bell rang again right on the other side. I pulled the door open. The next car wasn't a passenger carriage. It was wrong. It was vast, impossibly so. The ceiling arched high above, vanishing into shadow. The walls were lined with metal hooks, each holding an object that swayed gently as if rocked by a breeze I couldn't feel. Some were lanterns, giving off a weak, flickering light. Others were personal things, a child's shoe, a pair of spectacles with one lens cracked, a faded photograph of a family I didn't know. And there, at the far end, stood the conductor. He wasn't moving, but I could feel him pulling at me, not with his hands, but with something deeper, like an invisible chain looped through my ribs. Every step I took toward him felt heavier, but I couldn't stop when I reached him. He didn't speak. Instead, he gestured toward the wall. The hook nearest me held an object I recognized instantly. It was my wallet, except not the one I carried. Now, This was the one I'd lost 2 years ago, on a subway platform in a city miles away from here. I'd searched for days, cancelled all my cards, cursed my luck, and yet here it was, swaying gently on a hook inside a train that shouldn't exist. The conductor tilted his head, as if to ask, "Do you understand yet?" But I didn't, or maybe I didn't want to. He reached up and removed my wallet from the hook. Opening it, he pulled out something I knew wasn't inside when I'd owned it. A small, circular token made of blackened metal, etched with markings I couldn't read. He placed it in my palm. It was ice cold. "Your stop," he said, "is next." The lights flickered when they came back on. The room was gone. I was standing in a completely different carriage, one with walls of polished brass and mirrors on either side. My reflection stared back at me from every angle, except it wasn't always me. In some of the mirrors, I was older, in others, younger. In one, my skin was pale and waxy, my eyes hollow as if I'd been dead for days. The token in my hand grew heavier. I heard footsteps approaching from behind. I turned, but there was no one there, only another version of me in the mirror, smiling a fraction too wide. "You're not ready to get off," it said, though its lips never moved. "But he'll make you ready." The bell rang again, so loud this time that the mirrors rattled in their frames. I knew without looking that the next stop wasn't a place, it was a decision, and if I made the wrong one, I wouldn't be leaving the train. I would be staying on it forever. The train began to slow. I could feel it in my knees first, that subtle shift in weight, the way the body leans forward without meaning to. But this wasn't like a normal deceleration. It felt deliberate, like the train was taking its time, savoring the approach. The mirrors around me trembled with each metallic groan of the brakes. My reflections didn't match my movements anymore. In one, I was standing still while the others tilted their heads. In another, I was turning to the side. But the me in the glass was walking straight toward the viewer toward me. The bell rang. It wasn't just sound now, it was pressure. It rippled through my chest like an invisible hand squeezing, my heart urging me forward. The token in my palm had grown warm, almost uncomfortably so. And then the door at the far end of the mirrored carriage slid open. A cold draft rushed in, carrying with it a smell I couldn't place. Something faintly metallic, mixed with damp stone, and something sweet, like rotting fruit. I stepped through. The next car was nothing like the others. It was silent. Not the kind of quiet you get when sound just isn't there. This was a heavy, suffocating absence. The kind that made you aware of every swallow, every breath, every beat of your pulse. The space was dimly lit by a row of small yellow bulbs along the ceiling, but they weren't electric. Each one was a candle inside a glass jar, flickering faintly as the air shifted. And there, sitting on the benches, were people, or things that used to be people. Some of them had their heads bowed, hands clasped, like they were praying. Others stared straight ahead, unmoving. Their skin was pale, but not the natural pallor of someone tired. It had the color and texture of old wax, and their eyes, most were closed. The few that were open watched me with the stillness of taxidermy. I moved slowly down the aisle, the sound of my footsteps muffled against the wooden floor. My chest tightened with every step. I couldn't tell if I was holding my breath or if the air was just too thin here. At the far end of the carriage stood the conductor again. Only this time he wasn't alone. Something stood beside him. It was tall, much taller than a person should be, and impossibly thin, with arms that hung too low, the fingertips nearly brushing the floor. Its head was hidden beneath a hood, made of rough, black cloth. From beneath it, I could hear breathing. Slow, steady, deliberate. The conductor gestured toward the door behind them. "This is your stop," he said again. But there was no station outside. Through the window I could see only darkness, not the kind you get at night, where the stars at least puncture the void. This was absolute, smothering black, the kind that swallows even your thoughts if you stare too long. I glanced down at the token in my hand. It was glowing faintly, now, casting strange shadows across my fingers. "What happens if I don't get off?" My voice came out quieter than I intended. The conductor didn't answer, but the thing beside him tilted its head in a way that made my skin crawl, the hood's fabric shifting like something alive underneath. Then from somewhere deep in that darkness beyond the door, I heard it faint at first, then clearer. Footsteps coming closer. They weren't rushed. Whatever was approaching had all the time in the world. And then from the rows of waxy figures seated in the carriage, one of them finally moved. A woman near the middle row lifted her head. Her neck cracked audibly as she turned toward me. "You don't want to see who gets on," she whispered, her voice dry and splintered, like dead leaves crushed underfoot. "No one ever does." The footsteps outside grew louder. The candles flickered. The conductor stepped aside, giving me a clear path to the open door. The hooded thing shifted closer. I knew in the marrow of my bones that I was seconds away from having to choose, step into the darkness, or stay and see what was about to climb aboard. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't sure which was worse. The footsteps stopped. It was the kind of stop that wasn't a pause, it was a choice. A deliberate halting, as if whatever was out there knew I was listening. Knew my heart was hammering, knew I had nowhere to go. The hooded thing standing beside the conductor leaned closer to the open doorway, its head tilted slightly, as though it was scenting the air. The fabric around its hood shivered, not from wind, but from something moving beneath. The woman with the waxy skin whispered, "Again, close your eyes." Her voice seemed to come from inside my skull this time, echoing around my thoughts. I didn't move. My legs were locked, my body torn between fight, or just freezing in place until it was over. The darkness beyond the doorway began to change. It wasn't empty anymore. Shapes started to bloom inside it, faint at first, like stains on glass. They pulsed, growing sharper, until I realized they were faces. Hundreds of them. They weren't looking at me. They were looking past me toward the hooded thing, and their expressions. They weren't pleading, they weren't angry, they were hungry. The conductor's voice cut through the silence. Time to decide. The token in my hand was burning hot now. I could feel it pulsing like a living thing. Syncing with my own heartbeat, I took a step back. The hooded figure moved forward, one impossibly long arm reaching out toward me. Its hand emerged from the cloak, bony jointed wrong, the skin stretched, so thin it was almost translucent. I couldn't breathe. The woman in the seat hissed, "If you don't go now, you'll stay." I didn't know what stay meant, but I knew, in a way that bypassed reason entirely, that I didn't want to find out. I ran straight for the open doorway. The moment I crossed the threshold, everything changed. There was no ground under my feet, no platform, no station, just that suffocating darkness, and I was falling into it. The wind roared past my ears, but there was no air. My chest burned, my body twisting, until the shapes in the dark began to rush past me. Faces, the same ones I'd seen before. Now, close enough to touch. Some were screaming, others laughing soundlessly, their mouths stretched too wide. And then I felt them hands, dozens of them, brushing against my arms, my neck, my face. They weren't trying to pull me down, they were pushing me forward, shoving me toward light. I burst through it with a sound like tearing fabric, landing hard on a cold tiled floor. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in a subway station. Empty, silent. Token was gone. I turned toward the tracks, half expecting the train to still be there. But there was nothing, just the tunnel stretching into shadow. Then, from somewhere deep inside that tunnel, I heard it. The bell faint, but clear, and I knew it hadn't stopped. It never stopped. No final epiphany came. No explanation. Only the certainty that it could appear again, at any station, at any time, for anyone. I've avoided trains since that night. But sometimes, when I'm walking alone near the tracks, I feel the rails humming faintly under my feet. It's not the schedule, it's not the city. It's it. And if you ever hear a bell where there shouldn't be one, don't look for the source. Don't wait to see who's getting on. No final. Only this. In the end, there's only one certainty. The world we see may not be all there is. Comment below with your thoughts, and if you're brave enough, come back here tomorrow. There's always a new story waiting for you. But remember, some stories never end.